because they were in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and Europeans tend to not like to be in conditions where they don't have all the perks that go with staying there. And Mauritania is an extremely difficult environment to stay in. And like Suleiman Yang, Dr. Suleiman Yang says, you know, thank God for the malaria mosquito, because it really helped the West Africans out a lot against these Europeans that came. Now, wherever you see the Europeans went, you will see a dismantling of the traditional Islamic education. Wherever you see them go, you will see this. Now, what's fascinating to me, I do not in any way think that Mauritania is the end-all of Islamic education. I think there are a lot of things lacking there. I really do. But, unlike other places, they have not thrown the baby out with the bathwater. You see? I mean, there's bathwater there that needs to get thrown out. But the baby's still there as well. If you go to many other Muslim countries now, it all got chucked out. And this was a gross error by the Muslims, and they were tricked. And if you study it, I advise you to read a book called Social Reform in Syria, because it explains how the Western people literally changed the whole understanding of the Syrian culture about the place of traditional knowledge in their societies. And it took engineering and medicine and placed them on as the highest things, and Sharia became something that was really insignificant, of another era, something that we need to get beyond. In fact, this is the very thing that's held you back, and that's why you conquered us. And that is a lie. We were not conquered because of traditional education. We were conquered in spite of traditional education, and we have to recognize that. We were conquered in spite of traditional education. And if you don't believe that, you have to question yourself as to why they dismantled our universities one by one until the last one fell in 1938 in southern Morocco, in Marrakesh. You can see this. It was systematically done. Why? Because they're very frightened of people who know their deen. It bothers them. Now, just to look a little bit about the irony, really, of all of this, is that the Western university system is literally stolen without any credit from the Islamic system of training individuals. And these studies have been done extensively by several Orientalists of the later periods. The early Orientalists admitted there was some influence. They did not want to admit the extent of the influence, because it's very unnerving when you're attacking a people, calling them backward and barbaric, and then having to admit that, in fact, the reason that you have become civilized and humanized is those very people. That is problematic. If you have to admit that the reason that you take baths is because of Muslim cleanliness, that the reason that you have gardens to enjoy is because of Muslim love of reminding themselves in this world of what we expect in the next world. Because gardens are uniquely Eastern and Western Islam phenomenon. You find them in Asia also, amongst the civilized Asians, because the Asians were far more civilized than the Europeans. Gardens do not show up in Europe until they conquer Andalusia, where suddenly these Europeans walked into these houses with flowers all over the place and said, this is nice. How'd you do that? It's called cultivating your garden. Right? They never thought about it. They used to throw their garbage. Garde des loups means watch your head from the feces that they used to throw out of their windows. The plague that happens in Europe is a result of this. Now, we don't know our history. And if people who don't know they've done anything, like Malik Shabazz said, will never be able to do anything. If you don't know you've done something, you can't do anything. You have to know your history in order to become people of history. In other words, in order for those who come after us to say, those are great people, you have to know that those who went before you were great people as well. And we have to inculcate this deeply in the minds and hearts of our youth. We have to recognize that we are from a great tradition. We are from a tradition of thinkers. Fakhruddin al-Razi says in one of his books that he met a Christian, Habak, an alim from the Christians, a scholar. And he started talking to him about what he believed, and he said the man didn't have any foundation for speaking. because he didn't understand intellectual underpinnings of munadara, of a dialectic. So he said to this Christian, he said, listen, I want to teach you one thing. And this is it. It's a qaida, aqliya. I'm going to teach you this. And he said, the qaida is this. The rule is this. If you have a dalil, then you have to have a madlul. If you have an indication of something, there has to be the thing that it indicates as well. They go together. There's a talazum. But if you don't have the dalil, it doesn't necessarily mean you don't have the madlul. In other words, if you don't have the indicator, it doesn't necessarily mean the thing indicated doesn't exist. An example. The world indicates Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If there isn't a world, that doesn't mean there's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah was before there was a world. So he explained this to this man, and he said, عَصُرَ عَلَيْهِ كَثِيرًا فَلَمْ أَزَلْ مَعَهُ حَتَّى فَهِمَهُ. He found this very difficult to comprehend. So I really worked on him until he finally got it. And at the point he got it, I said to him, let me ask you something. Why do you say Jesus is God? He said, because أحيا الموتى. He brought the dead to life. And he said, oh, so that's your dalil that Isa is God. The madlul is that he's God because the dalil, he brought things to life that were dead. And he said, yes. And he said, well, that means then that you have to say Musa is a God also, because Musa threw down a staff that was an inanimate object, and it became a living snake. And he said, no, we don't say that. He said, well, why not? Didn't you agree with me that this is a sound intellectual principle? And he said, well, I'm getting confused here. فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرْ. That's what he says. Imam Fakhr says, بُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرْ. He became, because he won him over. And all at that point, he just has what's called juhud. He has juhud. He can, now at that point, he'll reject it, but he knows it's true. You see, this is juhud, and this is the essence of kufr. Now, Imam Sanusi, commentating on this story, says, the Christians really have the most difficult time understanding things. So how is it that these people who couldn't understand something, and he was one of their scholars, how is it now that they are teaching fuzzy logic, that they teach you Boolean logic, that they teach you these aqliyats? How is it that they've learned these sciences? Well, if you study how it is, they got it through interaction with the Muslims. Roger Bacon, who was teaching in England, used to wear a Saracen robe and a turban and was accused by the Church of England of apostasy because he was teaching that the Muslims actually had important things that we should learn. This is a medieval scholastic. The Pope was sending Christians down to learn from the Muslims in Andalusia. Now, if you look at the university system, because there are no universities in the West until they start looking at how the Muslims are teaching their students. This is the fact. The university introduces the concept of licencia docendi, which is a license to teach, a direct translation of a 4th, 5th century word, ijazatu tadris, a permission to teach what was granted by an alim who had studied with an alim and given him ijazah to give to a student a permission to teach. And at that point he was called mudarris. Doctor, is in fact someone who had the license to teach. But before he could be given a license to teach in the West, he had to bring forth a thesis and prove it before a group of scholastics. Now, where did they get that? Before somebody would get a license to teach amongst the Muslims at Al-Azhar, at the Qarawiyyin, at other places, he had to sit before a group of scholars and he would be asked questions, he would give a fatwa, and he would have to defend the fatwa. And if he couldn't defend it, he would not get an ijazah to teach, because he was not considered of a level in which he could teach people. You can see, this is rife. The chair, they call it the chair of a department. Where did they get that from? They're all sitting in chairs in the university. Why call the professor the chair? Because in the Muslim world, the student sat on the floor and the teacher sat on the chair. And so you had the chair of nahu, kursi al-nahu, kursi al-fiqh, kursi al-qira'at, kursi al-tafsir, kursi al-hadith. And on. I could go on and on. Graduation. Where do they get this gown from? because it looks a lot like what our scholars wear in the Middle East.